It's Spoilerin time, the show that takes the hard work of the show Cordkillers, where we figure out what to watch, watches it, and talks about it. This week, we are going to spoil Extras, Episode 5, Season 1, and the movie The Lion King, the new one, not the old animated one, the new animated one, which is kind of a live-action one. Anyway, I'm Tom Merritt. Who's he?
Hey, man, I'm Brian Brush, but most importantly, we got to check in on our silly summer movie draft. It's fantasy football, but for movies.
It's not silly.
Some years, I think it's silly.
Oh, this year is not.
Years that I have no chance of winning.
So it's serious this year. The Lion King has made $191,770,000 in its opening week. Brian?
Yeah, man. Sword and Laser has rocketed to third place. I assume you're going to overtake John Trekker here shortly. Do you think there's another 120 million left in the tank for you to overtake Frog Pants and take number one?
Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. Aladdin made 300 some million.
Yep.
So we will definitely, we will be in first place probably next week, maybe the week after.
Man,
bold. The question is, can we make enough more than John Trekker has now to stay in front of John Trekker when they get It Chapter 2?
So It Chapter 2, what did It Chapter 1 do? Let's see. It.
Yeah, because It is the only movie they have left. I think it's the last movie in the draft.
Yeah, we have Fast and Furious Hobbs and Shaw coming out August 2nd for Team Hammerson. Even at its best projection, it's not enough to move Hammerson up the ladder much.
But Hobbs and Shaw's
the only
not
movie after that is September
$600
6th, It Chapter 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe, I'm not finding the specific results here, but I believe it made over 200 million. So if that's the case, I mean, I gotta feel like
it made 327 million domestic.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of wild cards.
I think you might actually win.
Yeah.
It's quite possible that I am right when I say Sword and Laser is going to win this movie draft.
Although, I mean, if it does 250 million, then you're kind of hosed.
It really does matter the drop off at this point. I mean, The Lion King almost made $200 million in its opening weekend. It's going to hit 400 million.
Well,
I'm not worried about that. I need it to hit 500 million, which is very unlikely.
Let me set up this provision, and I'll say for a fact, if all of the reviews are good for The Lion King, then you will win.
They're not. It didn't matter. They made 191 million
with bad reviews. This is why I said that with a smile, because I knew for a fact that we're about to review The Lion King, and I already know.
I don't think that matters at all. If the reviews mattered, why would it make 191 million?
Well, let's talk about it.
Okay.
I mean, spoiler alert, I hated The Lion King.
Oh, that's where you're going with this.
Yes.
You hated it. Wow.
Hated it.
That's right. I think we're on all ends of the spectrum because I thought it was great. I thought it was beautiful. And by the end, I realized it was very much the original story with a few fun things changed. I get why it doesn't have as much of an emotional hit when you don't have the exaggerated faces that you have in the animated version, the fully animated version. But then Bryce, you loved it, right?
I went to go see it because I knew we would talk about it on the show. And I kind of thought, okay, well, it's going to be The Lion King. How bad can it be? And just the opening sequence with the Circle of Life, I teared up. I cried like 3 times during the movie. I bought in because as I was watching it, I was analyzing it, and I was like, this is not what people think it is. This is not what people want it to be. But for what it is, which is in the same vein as things like Meerkat Manor, right, where they actually take documentary footage and like make a reality show out of it. This is trying to ape that. It's trying to be animalistic, and where the original cartoon was kind of humanistic, right, with all the lights and all the colorful.
They were anthropomorphizing animals, whereas now we're doing the reverse.
We're simulating
we want
animals.
them to be, yeah, exactly,
right. And so buying into that, I really dug. I don't think it's perfect. It is an adaptation through subtraction only. There is not a lot of new stuff in here. and yet it's still longer than the original movie. But I think it's really cool, and I dug it. But hated it.
Things I liked about it: visually, what a treat!
Stunning.
You
right?
could tell me, that not even the ground was real. Everything from beginning to end was animated, and I would call it a marvel of technology. The motion was fantastic. I feared that we would have a bunch of dead-eyed animals and I would hate it, but I will say that across the board, the emotions that mattered came across not on the facial expressions, which is how the original did it, but instead with the postural expressions.
Like in the King's death, right? Like you remember in the cartoon, right? Like Simba is like pushing up on him and trying to like wake him up, where he doesn't even do that in this. He just like looks and he curls up with him, but it's not this like child.
The curling up was heartbreaking though, right? Like I thought that was one of the few cases where it worked better than the original, because it was just so like, oh, that's a thing that I could see one of my dogs doing if my other dog died. Like it just gave me chills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other things I liked, running thin. Okay.
Do you know what you think of Seth Rogen and Billy Eichner?
Oh yes, no, that's the only that is the only redeeming character quality to this whole thing. Seth Rogen and Billy Eichner were fantastic. It's the only part of the movie that took any kind of risk, that did anything interesting at all. Sure. Everything else. It's Christian rock music. So Christian rock music, what you have is a style and structure that is artistically dangerous, but they hold the core narrative that Christ is our Lord and so on, so sacred that it is so sacrosanct that Christian rock, they tend to not do anything interesting with the music. That is what I felt through the entirety of The Lion King. As a matter of fact, I went to go pee and I texted Penny. I said, "Oh God, Penny, this movie is awful. This is my 15-year-old daughter." She goes, "I warned you." And I said, "Ha ha ha." And she says, "Have they emoted even once?" And I said, "It's like Christian rock music. It apes the structure of subversive art, but it has so much respect for the source material that it refuses to take even one risk to seduce the audience. I feel like I'm in church getting a sermon I've heard a million times." This is Striper, isn't it? I was so bored. Wow. I hated it. And it was.
I mean, I know we just had the big metaphor. Like, is it? Why? I gotta like, what was it about? Is it just because it wasn't the cartoony thing? Or?
No. The style didn't bother me. It was the okay. At some point, look, you're in a club because you all love a thing. We're all there because we love the original Lion King and we love Hamlet, right? We're all there because we love the same thing. Mm-hmm. But there's somebody who loves it so much that it's off-putting to everybody else. I watched a version that overly fetishized the original Lion King to a point that was severely off-putting to me. And I got mad and I hated it. And I was like, will you do literally anything surprising or anything interesting? And I got little wisps of it with the Billy Eichner and the Seth Rogen stuff. But outside of that, nothing else. Not a single surprise was had that day.
And I feel like that's why it's successful, because not everyone wants surprise. And in fact, from this movie, I think people going to see it want that experience of, this is exactly what I expected, but gorgeous. It's the Lion King, but the animals are real. And I think that's what its success is. That wasn't enough for me either. I didn't hate it, but what I enjoyed about it was just how pretty it was. When I found myself getting bored, I would just look at how gorgeous it was. And I thought some of the voice acting was spectacular. I really appreciated the voice acting in this, even though it's different actors than the original. And I thought they all did a stellar job. In fact, Scar is probably better for me in this one than he was in the original. But that said, I was never, like you say, surprised. And I don't always have to be surprised if I'm given something else. But other than Seth Rogen and Billy Eichner, I wasn't given much else. Beyonce's song did not thrill me, which, is sacrilege to say. I love Beyonce, and she usually thrills me. Maybe I'll warm up to it after hearing it a few more times. But I enjoyed it because of how it looked and how it was essentially a nature documentary version of The Lion King.
And I could totally respect it in that regard. And I think my Christian rock metaphor stands up because if you're somebody for whom, religion is an important part of your life and it had a transformative impact to you, like even if you know the story, for example, everybody who went and saw The Passion of the Christ, the Mel Gibson thing, what they were saying...
It's bad because Christ didn't survive at the end.
Wait for the sequel. He comes back.
Also, how can you guys keep comparing this to Hamlet when everybody lives at the end? Come on.
Yeah.
So honestly, it's Kimba, really. No.
But my point is, for people who went to that movie, it was quite literally a religious experience. It was a narrative that they were very familiar with. They got no surprises during it, but it was realized to an incredible degree that impacted them very deeply. And I feel like what you're describing is sort of what the experience to Christians going to see The Passion of the Christ experienced.
I guess so, but I also wouldn't consider myself like a Disney diehard. Like they're like, and I have friends who are like that, right? Who like know all the musical numbers and know all the words and sing. And I guess I'm more like that with Lion King than a Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever.
Right.
But I don't know. I went in thinking like I'm not that diehard Disney fan.
But you're a casual fan of the narrative and familiar with the culture.
Sure, I have seen the original.
So I guess, again, forgive my obsession with metaphors, but you're like the casual Christian who goes and sees The Passion of the Christ and finds himself unexpectedly swept up in the reality of the moment.
I guess it didn't even cross my mind to expect it to be anything different than the original story.
But Aladdin was different in multiple places.
Exactly.
Like,
and
they changed it here and there to give you a new look. Jungle Book was very different, and that's Jon Favreau, same technology a few years earlier, right? He decided to go beat for beat, and I'm not saying that was a wrong decision because there were kids in the audience when I saw it, fascinated and coming out of it talking to each other. Because they were just swept up in it. And that's, I think, one of the big things here is it's a movie that because it's the same, every adult knows their child is going to like it. It's because the original was so good, and they know it's visually stunning. So it's going to be worth taking a look at.
Right.
And it's
a recipe. Success. This recipe works.
Right.
And it's not a different recipe. And so I
if you want a different recipe like Brian did, you're going to be really disappointed. And if you kind of could have used a little more of a different recipe like me, you're not going to be as over the moon about it. But if you don't care about that like you, Bryce, you're going to love it.
Yeah. Worth noting that my 6-year-old daughter, like full on, she cried at all the crying parts. She laughed at all the laughing parts. To her, it really was. She had never seen the original.
Really?
So this was the first time she had heard the sermon. And so to her, it was truly magical. And so I am defining my experience, not what I perceve everybody's experience should be.
Yeah. Sure. Wow. I mean,
it was heartbreaking.
She's not that young, but
I mean, she's 6. She's pretty young.
Oh, this was Callie. I was thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Extremely well executed. Just deeply disappointing that I perceive that there's a number of places that they could have taken some risks and really gotten everybody on board instead of people who had just never heard this before.
I think the big risks here are the things that they cut out. I mean, I think some of the stuff that I've seen online with people discussing it is like, Be Prepared went from this full length song to a 1 minute thing.
Reprise.
And I was like, oh, I'm surprised you would. I mean, it's a good song. They're all good songs. That's a really good song. And they were able to retool Just Can't Wait to Be King, so it didn't have all the big showy sort of visuals. I think that was kind of where they chose to take risks, was editing stuff out. And there are I think that is some of the weirdness of it too.
Separate issue. And now we are not evaluating the art of this, but because I was not caught up in the art, I had spare thought cycles to dedicate to this side jag. Personally, I'm deeply uncomfortable with the message of this show, that you are born into your station and you dare not leave. Even the king tried to leave. He experiences nothing, learns nothing, and is told, well, you were born to be a king, so come back and be king. And then it works. I hated everything about it. It's awful.
He has a responsibility.
It's awful.
I had the exact same thought when we were watching this. I'm like, man, this really is more monarchical than I remember. Like, and there's no. The thing is, I think what makes me okay with it is there's no credence given to the possibility that anyone else could have a different form of government. So they're just saying, look, we're going to assume a world with animals doesn't have any flexibility in its governing system. And then we're going to tell a story about like taking responsibility and everything within that. But if you start to back up and think about the actual like governmental system of the animal kingdom, it's pretty harsh.
But they go out of, well, hold on. No. They go out of their way to show off that adolescent Simba lifestyle as beatific, right? Nala comes in and he wants her to live in this beautiful no one.
And how does she react? She's legit horrified about this aberration of a lifestyle he's living. And she says, we've got to go back.
They've got a dictator they need
him to
oust.
overthrow the illegitimate uncle. That's what that is.
They have a tyrant. Yeah, this is about taking down a tyrant, not about against the free market.
To Brian's point, the only one who can legitimately take down the tyrant is the legal heir. You can't have anybody else do it. Why can't Nala take down the tyrant?
Yes.
Well,
oh my God. How much more would you have loved the Lion King if, like, at some point, because they have like 75 awesome lady tigers, lady lions, and it's like, why? What if they just subverted? They're like, what are we doing? Just kill this MFer, you know? And it's like that would have been amazing.
But it's also the animal kingdom, right? It's because I kind of like it's pack mentality and alpha.
No, you risk over interpreting it, right? It's like, okay, this you could excuse some things when this isn't actually people, but if you step back for a second. I do like that sequence though where he's an adolescent and like Timon and Pumbaa's entire spiel about it is much more detailed and is a much stronger motivation to explain that. I mean, I think it has more room to breathe in that versus in the original cartoon.
I think that's part of the reason that I even noticed it this go round is that Timon and Pumbaa explicitly say, hey, we are rejecting the thesis of this movie. This circle of life is garbage. And I'm like, oh my God, they're right. But the circle of life is garbage.
They're not right.
And then they go back to having them go back to the circle of life. I'm like, what are you doing? They
directly ignore the fact that they are a part of the circle of life. Where do the grubs come from? Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's all I've got on the Lion King. If there's anything else.
No, that's all I got too.
I have one last gripe.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a character musical where the characters are singing.
Yes.
And everyone gets a song. And I think it is the weirdest choice to make a Beyonce song where Beyonce is a character in this movie, where her character sings, to be a song in the movie that her character is not singing. Because suddenly it's not Nala, it's Beyonce's in this movie. It's,
if Nala had sang Beyonce's new song, I might have liked it better. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's just crazy to me.
I do have one last beef to throw out there.
Okay, please.
As somebody who loves Last Week Tonight with John Oliver.
Sure.
That the character of that show is nothing but John Oliver punching up. He's punching up at the likes of Amazon and the government and all that stuff. Really sort of soured my ability to perceive him as the little guy punching up when he's a main character in a Disney franchise that overly worships the dogma of the original narrative. And it's like, it's just like, I didn't like it because also he's literally representing the establishment the entire movie long, and that's not the character of John Oliver that I like on HBO week after week. I didn't like it.
It's called acting.
I understand, but it's
he's not actually a bird, right?
He's acting in both the bird role, and I understand that he's acting in his HBO role,
right?
But knowing the person,
whether if John Oliver is a journalist is a much larger conversation, though.
Correct. And what I'm saying is his participation in this movie that I did not like, that made all the money on the planet.
That's your thing, right?
Affected my perception of his pro wrestling role of kind of the person and the actor.
You're just going to be sitting there muttering, I think catch the Lion King checks, though, didn't you, John?
Look,
I've also never thought of John Oliver as the common man, though. Maybe it's the accent of it.
It's part of the experience of watching the show is you perceive him on the couch next to you.
His premium cable political show.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Extras, Episode 5, Season 1, Samuel Jackson, where we get very minimal Samuel Jackson compared to some of the other guest actors. But when we get him, we get him.
I had the exact same thought. I was amazed at like 22 minutes in. I was like, was he just in the beginning? But it's like when he shows up for a very deliberate purpose. And it is amazing.
And our ongoing sort of comparison to this in The Office UK, because we just happened to watch The Office UK before this was the most uncomfortable of the extras so far, especially the conversation with Samuel Jackson, where not only is she being awkward, but now Ricky Gervais is also being awkward. But it was uncomfortable in the best possible way, right? It was uncomfortable in a way that's like, oh, yeah, no, oh, no, you should have, oh, yeah. And you feel for the characters. You don't feel like you hate the characters.
They did such a great job of couching it that it's almost like they defined, if they had just put a label on it, I feel like it would be in common lexicon now. But there's some kind of gap between actual racism and not racism is some kind of unfortunate hyper awareness and sensitivity to how everything you say could be perceived.
I can't remember his name now, but the actor who's like, I just got a few lines that she dates. He says like, yeah, no, I don't think you're a racist, but obviously the black thing is getting in the way. It's on your mind. So let's reset and try this again.
Which I really
he's
dug.
Expressing exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. And I dug that he did that and didn't make a thing out of it. And of course, he was 100% right, given the actions of the next, 13 minutes of the episode, right down to, I loved the fact that they wrapped everything up when like Ricky Gervais clearly sees the lay of the land when the dude walks up and he's like, okay, we're being escorted off. And then meanwhile, his friend is like, wait, you've got your line with Samuel L. Jackson. And I thought at the exact same time he said it, he's just like, there's no line. What are you crazy? Where, like, are you not seeing what just happened?
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah. No, and continuing at least the one trope of like, he will always be trying to get a line, come very close to getting a line, never get a line. Right.
Yeah.
And she will always be trying to find a date and find a love interest and get close to it and never achieve it.
So the lonely divorcee who tries to start a friendship with Ricky Gervais.
Oh gosh,
I would have liked to see that pay off a little bit better, but it was a very strong opening. Like, this is somebody who's lonely but confident enough to just say, I'm very lonely. Would you like to be my friend? And yeah, I wanted to see that go somewhere. These horrible
things happen to them, like I just want to have some laughs with a mate, right?
Yeah, right.
Here's where it went off the rails for me. That person believably says, let's go get a couple of pints. And Ricky Gervais believably is uncomfortable with that because he didn't really like the guy, but it's like, well, why shouldn't I? If they go get in a couple of pints and it gets weird, I'm on board. But let's get a meal and let's go to an Italian restaurant and playing with they think we're gay. I was like, well, is he supposed to be gay? Because then that's not funny. That's just, like misunderstanding, or maybe you could help him out. I felt like that's where that storyline became hard for me to enjoy.
Well, and also the punch out of throwing his face into the soup, like if that did something. I mean, basically
it's a slapstick move to get out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was almost as though like at the script he didn't know what to do, so he wrote, "Hey audience, I'm done. This is as far as I got." So
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I felt like it, like you say, it didn't start without promise, but it didn't lead anywhere either funny or even sensible.
Yeah, I did think that the love interest on the dating side looked an awful lot like Grey Worm. I had to look up on IMDb to see if it was the same actor.
To see if it was the same actor.
But then, of course, there's a 14-year difference between the two.
Maybe they're both British, right?
Yeah. No, they look very similar. Turns out I was wrong. Only it took me a million freaking steps because I had to go to IMDb and look up extras in season 2, and I got
right. You should have been watching this on Amazon.
Okay, don't this guy.
But yeah, I really don't have much else to say. This is both kind of the best of episodes, the worst of episodes at the same time for different reasons. And of course, the fabled Patrick Stewart episode coming next week.
Do you have any idea what to expect?
Nope.
It's great.
I haven't looked around. I just know that everyone says, "Oh, but that episode." That's all I know.
Watch it as soon as we're done. Watch it the moment we wrap up.
Awesome. Well, that's it for this episode of Spoilerin Time. Thanks for hanging out with us, letting us spoil you rotten. You're the best. Patreon.com/Cordkillers to prove it, and we'll spoil you again next week.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.